Today in the video, I just wanted to have some fun, so I thought what I would do is take a piece of wood and attempt to make a bespoke pin. Now, I know wood is not the best material to use for bespoke simply because it expands and contracts with moisture and dry air, and that can cause a problem, but I still thought it would be fun to do. I'm going to go ahead and give it an attempt. I think what I'm going to make out of this is a bespoke pin with a Parker nib on it so that I can use standard ink and carry this in my pocket and kind of show it off. So it may or may not work, but one way or the other we're going to find out. This is a nice piece of olive wood, got some beautiful grain in it. First thing I'm going to do is get it trued up. With the blank trued up, I'm ready to go ahead and put a 5/16 inch tenon on the end of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mark it in 2 spots. And the reason why I'm doing that is I need to go ahead and face off the end of this blank so it's nice and square. This is 5/16 of an inch between the 2 marks, so I will face it off to this mark, and then I will cut the tenon, the 13mm tenon, between these two. My tenon is at 13.08 millimeters, so I'm very happy with that. We're going to go ahead now and attempt to thread this blank. I tell you what I'm going to do. Before I thread it, I think I'm going to go ahead and put a thin coat of CA glue on the end of it, which will make sure that all the fibers are locked together. Then we'll come back, thread it, and see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of coats. I really want to lock these fibers together and make them as tight as possible because I think that's going to help with the threads. One of the things I forgot to do was cut a relief on the back of my tenon. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to recoat this with CA. I'll flip my die around and run the back half of the die up on the threads, which should make sure they're all cut to the same diameter and the same pitch. The threads look fairly decent considering it's wood. Once again, I'm going to apply several coats of thin CA and just sort of let it soak in and solidify those fibers. I've reversed the die, so let's go ahead and just chase the threads. I've got a nice tight fit on my tenon, but the tight fit is toward the back, and what I'm worried about is I may have tapered the front a little too much. 13.08 in regard to wood may be just a little too much. So what I think I'm going to do, I still have plenty of a blank here. I'm going to go ahead and face this off, and we're going to cut another tenon and go ahead and repeat this process. I've already applied a little CA glue to the blank. Now we're going to attempt to cut a tenon, or I'm sorry, threads. Okay, get a little CA glue on there, flip our die around, and we'll clean them up. being very careful. I don't want to put any undue pressure on this because I could tear the threads out. There we go. Now we'll give them a quick test. And they bite right away. That's good. Now on the back, my tenon, I actually have a buildup of CA glue there. You might be able to see it. I'm going to go ahead and clean that up, but I've got a nice tight fit. So what we're going to do, we'll clean the tenon up, and then I'll come back. I am going to put a coat of thin CA on here once again, let it dry, and then we'll test and make sure the cap fits nicely because I want to make sure I give those threads the best chance of survival possible. I'm really happy with that. That's nice. All right, quick coat of CA. Just want to get that worked down into the threads. I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes and we'll test again. I'm not quite seating all the way up against my blank. And I think what that may be is you could see a little bit of a thick lip there. I'm going to run the tap or the die back up on this one additional time because I think that's still some of that buildup that I had. I am running the die up on the threads in reverse. And I can see the little lip on the back of there, so I'm hoping I'll cut through that. Yep, I could feel it, a little bit of resistance there as it cut through. I'll run this all the way up and it just butted against the blank. So I'm happy about that. We're going to go ahead and back it off. That buildup was from the previous CA glue application. I am going to put another coat of CA on here because I need to make sure that I do everything to protect these threads. Just going super, super slow here. Don't want to get in a hurry, mess anything up. Just going to brush the threads off with a toothbrush, make sure there's nothing in them. Going to do a quick test. Oh, nice. We're right up against the blank. Oh, yeah, I like that. All right. I'm going to go ahead and put a thin coat of CA on here. Time for a quick test. And I couldn't be happier. I got a nice tight fit. Measuring from the back edge of my section to the tip of my refill, I'm getting 62.8 millimeters. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an S-bit in our Jacob's chuck, and we're going to drill in 62.8 millimeters into this blank. I've measured back 62.8 millimeters on my bit and made a little mark. This is where we'll stop drilling. I've also added a collar onto my body of my pin to help protect the tenon as I'm drilling and tapping. I've already got a dimple made by a starter bit in the center of this blank. I was using that for my live center to help me steady this when I was truing it up. That should let me find center with my bit and go ahead and drill perfectly down the middle of my blank. We're at the red mark, so we're going to stop. The collar seems to have done a really nice job. I didn't have any issue with my blank splitting while drilling. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and use an M10 one tap, and we're going to thread the hole that we just made in this blank. Before cutting these threads, I want to get some CA glue in there to help solidify the blank. And before we do that, we need to get the get that off real quick, or else I'll end up gluing it to the blank. I'm going to let that CA glue just sort of set in there and dry for a few minutes, and then we'll be ready to start tapping. The CA has had plenty of time to dry both inside the blank and any overspray that I got on the outside. I was able to reinstall my collar, so we're ready to go ahead and tap this blank. Once again, I just want to go super slow. Getting a little bit tight there, so I'm going to make sure I back it up a little more each time to give it time to clear those chips. And you know what? We're just going to go ahead and bring it out because I don't know how bad those chips are building up inside of my tap. So we're not going to take a chance. There we go. Go ahead and clean them off. And then we'll restart the tap and finish threading. All right, we've reached the end of the threads on our tap, so we're going to very carefully bring the tap out of the blank. What I want to do is I want to get this blank, I'm just going to leave it in the chuck, but I'm going to remove the chuck from the lathe so I can turn the blank up and clean any shavings out of it. Then we're going to flip it the other way, and I'm going to drool some CA, some thin CA down onto those internal threads, and we're going to run the tap back up through the blank one more time after we get those threads cleaned out and get some CA on them. I just put a little thin CA on the edge of the threads, and I'm just twisting it in my hand to let it follow the threads down into the blank. It's gotten pretty far down in there. I'm going to let it sit on the lathe and dry naturally, and then we'll come back. We're going to test this and see what kind of a fit we have with the section. And if the fit is good, we won't run the tap through there again. But if the fit is at all tight, or it's hard to thread it in or out, we will run the tap through there one more time just to clean things up. So we're going to let it set for a few minutes and solidify. Before turning the camera back on, I went ahead and tried to thread my nib into the body of my pen. And it started, but it didn't want to go in very easily. So I thought, okay, go ahead and stop. Let's run the tap through there one more time, clean those threads up, and then we should be able to seat our nib comfortably inside the body of our pen. You can see the curls coming out, and those curls are not wood, they are CA. All right, we're just about to the end of the threads, and let's bring it out. I want to be careful. I don't want to put any pressure on this tap and die holder because I don't want to pull against the threads and take a chance at messing them up. I'm just kind of supporting it and letting the threads bring themselves out of the blank. There we go. Let's go ahead and remove our collar from the blank. And let's attempt to thread. I've got a section here. This is an Alumilite section, and I've got a Parker ink refill. And quite honestly, I probably will end up staying with an Alumilite section because the section is going to take a lot of abuse with writing all the time. And until I can source a piece of African blackwood, I think this is going to be the section that I use on my pen. Let's go ahead and attempt to thread it in. It's threading quite nicely. Not a lot of play. Ooh, that's a real nice fit. And looky there, we have no play in the ink. So that means we drilled it to the proper depth. I am really happy with this. That looks amazing. That looks absolutely amazing. Normally at this point, I would remove this blank from my pen jaws. I would install a collet chuck with an aluminum mandrel, flip this around, and begin shaping it. The issue that I have is the aluminum mandrel that I have was designed for a pen that's going to have a converter, a fountain pen style bespoke pen, and it's far too long for this blank. I have some 1/2-inch aluminum rod. My plan is to turn my own mandrel for this style of a body. The issue is I bought a second M101 tap to use for that because I didn't want to use my good tap to tap aluminum and take a chance at dulling it out to where it didn't cut as well on the bespoke with the plastics, the alumilites and the woods. So that particular die happens to be 1 1/8 inches in diameter. My die holder will accept a 1-inch die. So I need to source a handled die holder so that I can turn an aluminum rod this distance and to be able to insert it into this blank and hold it in a collet chuck. So what we're going to attempt to do with this one is I'm going to go ahead and start turning the cap. Since this is wood, it should turn fairly easily. I'm going to leave it full length. We're going to flip it around, install it in the cap. We're going to try to shape the two of them together to see just how well we can do. Will it work? I don't know, but we're going to test it out until I can get a handled die holder in my shop. I've got another piece of olive wood chucked up in my lathe. I'm going to go ahead and true it up, and this is going to be the cap for my pen. We need to drill into the cap far enough to accept the section as well as the tip of the nib, and it looks like that's about somewhere a little over 46 to 47 millimeters. So if we take that out to say 50 millimeters, what that's going to do is give us plenty of room to be able to shape the end of our cap. I've made a mark on my bit that is 50 millimeters from the tip to the mark, so we're going to go ahead and drill our blank out. I stopped drilling because I realized I made a mistake. I set my calipers for 50 millimeters, and I really want to be somewhere between 46 and 47 millimeters to accept the nib and the section. So I'm going to bump this up to about 47 millimeters, and I'm going to remark my bit right about here. 50 millimeters is where I want to part this off, so I've got plenty of room to clean the end of the cap up and give it a nice shape. I'm glad I caught that now before it's too late. One thing I neglected to do was face up the end of the blank. You can see there's a slight angle there. I'm going to go ahead and true this up. And if it turns out that the depth is a little too shallow to accept the nib once I place the section inside of it, the nib point is very small. I can always take a smaller bit and just drill out the center just enough to accept the nib. I need to drill a 12 millimeter hole 1.5 inches into my blank. This is a 15/32 inch bit, which is just a tiny bit smaller than 12 millimeters, but it's the closest thing that I have. You'll notice the red mark at 1.5 inches on the bit. Let's go ahead and get this drilled out. I'm going to start out by drilling a little CA into the blank. And just kind of working it around. Sorry I got out of camera there. Just working the CA around in there. You can kind of see how it's getting real shiny. I want to make sure the entire surface area is covered, especially up toward the front of my blank. And it looks like it is. I'm just going to put this on the lathe. I'm probably going to turn it on low speed, let it spin for a few minutes, and we're going to go ahead and make sure that CA is good and dry before we tap the threads into this blank. CA's had plenty of time to dry. I'm ready now to go ahead and start putting some threads inside my blank. I do believe we've reached the bottom of our blank because the tap doesn't want to turn anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it from the blank. There we go. We've got the cap cleaned out, and what I want to do now is just run a little CA down through those threads. I'm going to put it on the lathe, turn it on low speed, and just sort of let it spin so it doesn't really pool up anywhere. And once that CA is good and dry, we'll tap those threads. Looking into the blank, the threads look really nice, so I'm hoping that we can just follow them right on down to the bottom, and you can see that CA getting cut out of there, and hopefully that CA will help the fibers in the wood hold together and hold these fine threads a little better. Just going to run the tap all the way in and back it off a little bit to clear it. I'm getting a little bit of resistance, but that's okay. Depends on how much CA pooled up at each part of the blank. I'm not overly concerned about that because we are cutting it out. Okay, I think we've reached the bottom. Go ahead and back the tap out of the blank. Here's where I want to really slow down. I want to get this off the lathe once again, clean out the inside of the blank, and then we'll test it with the body of our pin. I've removed all the debris from the threads of my pin cap, and I've brought the body of my pin over with the section and the nib still installed, and I'm just going to test fit them to make sure we have plenty of clearance for the section and the nib, and it looks like we do. I'm very happy with that. Look at that. Nice tight fit all the way around. Now what we want to do is we want to focus on truing up the body of the pin, and then we'll measure the distance that we want the pin to be, get it parted off and cleaned up, and then we'll focus on the cap. We're going to start by putting a little 60-degree dimple in the end of this blank, which will let me use my tailstock to sturdy it. Going to be real careful because I just don't know how well those threads will hold. There we go. Very gingerly, I'm going to attempt to true the end of this blank up. That went fairly well. It was very nerve-wracking, I'll be honest with you, but it is trued up. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop and sharpen my tool because I want to make sure I'm getting nice clean cuts. And then we're just going to go from end to end, and we're going to get this to the same diameter, cap and body. Once it's to the same diameter, I'll come back and I'll measure where my ink cartridge ends, and then we'll get the end of it parted off, and we'll start shaping and truing up the end of our pen body. Got a beautiful fit between the cap and the blank. My only regret is that I couldn't match these two pieces of olive wood up because I didn't have a piece that was long enough to do that. However, with this being a triple start, I may be able to start it to where these pieces fall close to one another, and it should look pretty good. This is the part that I'm going to hold on to. I was going to actually shorten this a little bit, but I've got a fairly big hand. I kind of like that. So I think what I'm going to do is just start tapering the back of this down and start rounding the end over, and I'll come back and all I will part off is the dimple that I put in the end. It's become very obvious that I'm not going to be able to fix the end of this pen without the support of the tailstock. I've got it rounded over pretty good. I'm just trying to figure out what the best policy may be. What I'm thinking I might be able to do is we're going to leave this alone. This is where I want it right now. I think if I take a block of, say, Alumilite and chuck it up, go ahead and thread it with these M13.8 threads, maybe I can turn this into it, and that will be shorter, which will give me, I'll be okay support-wise to be able to turn that. It's just in the cap, the threads just are not going to be able to hold it in place. So we're going to put this aside. We're going to work on getting the cap finalized, its shape, and then we'll see what we can do to clean the tail end of this up. I've made a mark on my blank, and this is where I need to part the blank off. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and attempt to true a little bit of this wood up. I'll remeasure that spot, and then I'll start to taper it down like I did the body of my pen. You'll notice I've got just a little piece of acrylic up here that I turned down to 13 millimeters, and I tapped to M13, I thread it to M13.8 threads so that it fits the body very nicely. I'm hoping having things closer together like this will take a little bit of the vibration out and allow me to finish this blank up without a whole lot of trouble. Well, my worst fear came true. It cracked right along a grain line there. What I'm going to do is put some CA in there and clamp it together in hopes that that I'm able to correct the issue, because I would really like to save this blank. That means I'm going to have to come up with something else. I may just have to go ahead and part this off and then use sandpaper to clean it up as opposed to a gouge, which is okay. It just takes a lot longer. I was hoping to go with the gouge, clean it up, and then sand it. But let me get this glued up, and we'll be back in a minute. I used a flush cut saw and just cut the end of this blank off. There was my mark right there. What I'm going to do is use sandpaper, a really abrasive grit, to start sort of bringing this down. I went ahead and put a little tape on here, and hopefully that's tight enough to keep this from moving. And if we can get this shaped, this is the right diameter. We just need to cone the front down and make it look nice, and then we can sand this blank up and get some finish on it. I've cleaned the cap with denatured alcohol, and I put a little clear paste wax on the blank. My hope is that that will help keep the CA from sticking, because my biggest fear is, as I CA this, I glue it to this, this acrylic mandrel that I made. So let's see what happens. I just finished applying my final coat of CA. And what I'm nervous about is we need to see if this blank is stuck, or this cap is stuck to this mandrel. Oh, nice, nice. The paste wax did a great job. Okay, I'm going to turn around and get my micro mesh. We're going to micro mesh this. We're going to buff it up, and then we'll do the same with the body. And hopefully very soon we'll have a gorgeous finished pin. Wow, it already looks amazing. I can't wait to buff this up and see how it looks. This ought to be kind of tricky. I've got this on low speed, and I've got a little bit of wobble in my blank. It's extremely difficult to get this one trued up perfect. I've been fiddling with it for a bit. I'm going to try to just come in and just clean this end up and then sand it and see if I can't make it look pretty decent. It's not working so well. It's wobbling so much you can see what's happening. It's almost like an off-center turning. Let me, I think I'm going to resort to sandpaper on this one and see if I can't clean it up a little better. I went over to my disc sander and used my pin blank squaring jig, and I cleaned the end of this up to where I got rid of the little dimple from the live center, and then I sort of tried to shape it by hand. Didn't do too bad of a job. Now what I want to do is take sandpaper and really just try to clean this up. Even with a wobble in it, the sandpaper, it's not like a gouge where it's going to hit and miss. It should be able to touch it the whole time. So I think I should be able to sand this up and get it looking pretty decent. Yeah, we're not having any missed spots. It's going to be a slow process, but I think it's going to work fine. I'm going to shut the camera off and get my dust collection turned on, and we'll get this thing sanded up. I've got my blank sanded down. It's been cleaned with denatured alcohol. I think it looks pretty darn good. I have put wax on the threads of my pin body as well as on the face of this block in hopes that the CA will not stick. We're wobbling quite a bit, but I don't think that's going to hurt me too bad. All right, I'm going to shut the camera off, finish up my coats of CA, and we'll come back when it's time to micro mesh. I've got the finish applied to my blank. I think it looks really nice. I'm going to go ahead and shut the camera off while I micro mesh it, and I'll come back as we go to the buffer and polish it up. Ready to go ahead and buff my pin, get a little bit of rouge on the wheel. It looks fantastic. I actually buffed up the blank before I turned the camera back on, but I would like to present to you my first wooden bespoke pen made from olive wood. It accepts a Parker refill, and I'm really happy with the pen. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I'd really like to thank you for joining me in the shop tonight for the making of this olive wood bespoke ink pen. This was a true labor of love. I tell you, I really am sorry that I did not have all of the tools that I needed to be able to make the mandrels, because I think this would have been so much easier. But all in all, I'm happy with how the pen turned out. I'm going to take it to work tomorrow and I'm going to start using it. This is going to become my daily use pen because I really love it. I hope to make some more of these, but I hope to wait until I can build the mandrels first, because I think that's going to make all the difference. I really want you to know that I appreciate you joining me for these videos. I'd like you to know that you are always welcome in my shop, and I want you to come back and see me again real soon. Take care, everybody, and have a great evening.